If you own a BMW X5, X6, or X7 like this, and this message pops up on your dash, it's time to change your rear brake pads. In this video, I will show you what tools you will need, what parts to order, and explain the difference between regular trailer option and M Sport brakes, which does make a difference on what parts you will need. So let's get to it. On most cars, the first step would be to jack up the car, but this is a BMW, so there are a few extra steps we have to do. First, if your car has air suspension, you have to disable it before doing anything underneath, as the car may lower itself while you're working there, so that would be very dangerous. So we have to disable the air suspension. So all you're gonna do is hold this button down for about 7 seconds. So 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let go, and as you can see, the LED goes out, which means the air suspension is now disabled. To make sure you have actually disabled it, press the button one more time, and you should see this message pop up that tells you that level change is not available. All right, so I have put the car into diagnostics mode by pressing the start button 3 times, and now we're gonna enable repair shop mode. So I'm gonna be using this V-Diag tool because it's very easy to use and it's not very expensive, or you can use one of the BMW scanners I reviewed previously. I'll have some links in the description. But basically, I just went into the EPB function and I'm going to activate the repair shop mode, which will do all these things. Basically release the parking brake for me. So I'm going to hit OK, press OK. And it just finished. Perfect. It has been successfully activated. Done. With our air suspension disabled and workshop mode enabled, it's finally time to jack up the car. So I'm just going to go in the back here. Of course, I put a chalk in front of the front wheel so the car wouldn't roll. It shouldn't anyway, but it's still a good practice. Next, of course, we have to take off the wheel lock so we can take off the wheel. And usually that's kind of a difficult job if you don't have one of these. But I'm going to be putting this CSI impact wrench to the test and see if I can actually do this without having to loosen the bolts first. Most of my other impact wrenches can't do this, so, well, let's see. More on this later. Wow, that was easy. That one was a little bit more difficult, but that came out pretty easy. Wow, it's doing it. There you go. I'm pretty impressed. The first thing to do after removing the wheel is to remove the brake pad wear sensor, which is going to be located just right there. So that should just pull out. I may need a screwdriver for that. And then we have to route all of this wire out, disconnect it, and then of course we're going to install a new one once we are done. Mine is kind of stuck in there and yours might be as well, but if you break it, it doesn't really matter because, well, we're replacing it. Next, we have to remove these 2 bolts which hold the caliper in place, and then we'll be able to pull it out. You will need a 13mm socket for this, so it just goes on here. And it's probably a good idea to get a 17mm wrench and just hold it in place like that. And once you can loosen it by hand, you can take out the bolt. There it is. And as you can see, the top is now loose, so now we're just going to do the same thing at the bottom. There's the bolt in question, and I switched to a slimmer socket just so I'm not hitting this electronic part right there. There it is. And it's out. The brake caliper can now be removed, so we just pull it out. As simple as that. It's pretty heavy, so be careful. And I'm going to be using my specialty bungee cord, this is just a bungee cord, to kind of tie it up and out of the way. Not strictly necessary as it sits quite nicely in here, but just in case. Now that it's secure, we can remove the old pads. Let's see if there's any life left on those. There is a bit, but you know, BMW is trying to be pretty safe. And actually this is 2,000 miles over the limit, so when the light came on, it was about 2,000 miles ago, and look, we still have a pretty decent amount of pad left. And of course, this is where the sensor was and where we're going to be installing the new one. So this one with the little bump like this is going to be going on the inboard of the vehicle. We of course will be removing this hardware as well, so it's time to remove it, and this top one as well. You probably need some specialty tool from BMW, but a screwdriver works just as well. There it is. I'm going to clean this up real quick, and then we're going to take a look at what parts we actually need. BMW X5, X6, and X7 have 3 options for brakes. Most cars will have the regular or standard brakes, which come with the 345mm rotors. If your car has the trailer coupling option or the M Sport brakes option, then your rotors will be 370mm and, of course, a different part number. These are not interchangeable without swapping other parts. The brake pads are the same on the regular and on the trailer coupling brakes, but calipers are different on the M Sport brakes, and thus you will need a different set of brake pads. Finally, the sensor is the same on all three options, so that's pretty easy. If this is confusing, check out the description and I'll have the part numbers for each option and more. I went with Fabi for the sensor because I've used them before and it works well, and it's one of the manufacturers for BMW. And I went with Jurid, I don't know how to pronounce this, brake pads. This is OEM for BMW and they should be pretty good quality. They're basically the same as you would get from BMW, except much cheaper. These were actually only about $45 and they seem to be pretty good. So we're gonna get these installed. Of course, they come with all of the new hardware. So you have all the hardware right here. You have new bolts to install as well, and the brake pads themselves. Lastly, you will need some brake lubricant. That way your brakes are not squeaking and all the parts are moving the way they're supposed to. When it comes to parts, you will definitely need the brake pads and of course the sensor. And if your rotors have a big lip or are very rusty, you should replace those as well. My rotors actually look pretty good. There's a bit of rust here, but that's really surface rust. It doesn't really matter. I checked the thickness and that's good as well. And there is no lip, which is really important. And this is pretty flat as well. So I'm going to be reusing mine. But of course, if you need to change yours, it's actually very simple. You would simply remove the set screw right here. So you just take that out and then the rotor will come out without having to remove the carrier. So that's a pretty cool design on the new G series BMWs. With everything more or less cleaned up, we can now mount the sliding plates. So it's just gonna go in like that, same way we took it out. Might need a little bit of force, but there you go. The top one goes in just as easy. Now we just have to apply a thin coat of this brake pad paste to this area right here, as well as the contact surface on the back of the pad. So let's do that now. You definitely don't want to use too much. Make sure you don't get any of this on the actual brake pad surface, because that might not work so well. As easy as that. Next, we're going to switch our attention to the caliper, and a lot of people find this intimidating, but it really isn't. All we really have to do is push this piston inside the caliper. Why? Well, because otherwise our pads wouldn't fit. Of course, this is why we put the car into the workshop mode. Otherwise, it would not allow us to do so. It would be locked. So yes, you can use some special tools to do this, and it's probably going to be a little bit easier with that. But to show you how simple this is, and how you don't need any special tools, I'm going to be using a simple C-clamp. Now, there is a connector in the back here, which normally you wouldn't see on most other cars, but it simply unplugs. So we can unplug it, and then I have a flat space where I can put my C-clamp in, just like that, and very slowly push the cylinder in. It takes very little pressure. Normally, I would recommend putting a brake pad in here, like the old used one, but this is so flat and so large that I don't think it's even necessary. That's as far as we want to go. That's it. Now all that's left to do is clean this up a little bit and put it back on the carrier. Yeah, looks good enough to me. While we're at it, we might as well put a little bit of this paste on these parts right here. That's what's going to be touching the pads, just like that. And I'll put a little bit on this cylinder as well. And this will help reduce the squeaks and things like that. I'm going to plug this connector back in, make sure it clicks. Flip over my caliper, make sure it's in the right position. And just push it in place, like that. With the caliper in place, we can grab our new included bolts that have the thread locker on and put those in by hand. The reason we're doing it by hand is because we still have to do the sensor. So I just wanted to have it loosely in here. And then I will tighten everything down once we are sure that the sensor is in place. So of course we have to fish out the old sensor, which is right here. So I'm just gonna fish it out right here and right there. So there's a few little hangers for it. Okay, open up this box. There it is. So we can unplug it. Unplug. Now we can grab the new one. Plug it in. Make sure it clicks. And it did. Perfect. Put it back in its place. Close the little box. And go again through those little hangers. Make sure it's attached everywhere. That way it doesn't get in the way of the suspension. And the last one's right here before we put the actual sensor in. And now we just plug the sensor into the brake pad. Here is how it works. So this is from the other side. You would just put it like this, just like that, and then push it in. That's exactly what I'm gonna do right here. Might be hard for you to see, but I'm gonna use a screwdriver to push it in. And it clicked, we're done. Now we simply tighten both bolts and then torque them to spec. The torque spec is gonna be 35 Newton meters. There it is, done. Now I'm just gonna do the same thing for the bottom bolt. And that's it. We are now done. I'll do a quick clean of the surface right here, and then the wheel can go back on. And just like that, one side is done. Now we just have to do the same thing on the other side, except there is no sensor, so it's a little bit easier. I used the C-side impact wrench on the other side as well, and I must say I'm very impressed with the quality, especially since this entire kit comes in under $100 and includes the 580 pound-feet of torque impact wrench, 2 4-amp-hour batteries, the charger, and 6 impact rated sockets, all in a decent hard carrying case with storage pockets. Looking at this impact wrench, it feels to be well built with great specs. This tool has a brushless motor inside with variable speed and a choice of 3 speed modes which can be adjusted depending on the work you are doing. I also like that it's nicely balanced in my hand with the battery installed. Speaking of the batteries, these seem to last a very long time. I've used the same battery a few more times and only got it down to 2 bars. All in all, this C-side impact wrench has exceeded my expectations, and I would recommend it to anyone looking for a cordless half-inch impact wrench that will save time changing wheels on your car or on any other automotive job requiring some torque. So I finished the other side, and as you can see, it's pretty dark outside now, but we're just going to go back on the scanner, go to EPB, electronic parking brake, go to BMW, and we're going to take it out of the workshop mode. So just going to scan the car, connect to it, and all that stuff. There it is. So now I'm going to go disable workshop mode, continue. Okay. And now I can actually hear the electromechanical parking brake winding back in, which means our brake should be back to working and we can start using the parking brake as well. So the last thing I'm going to do is just use the e-brake a couple of times to make sure it goes in and out correctly, pump the brakes a couple of times, and then go for a drive. Now that we've changed the brakes, you might be wondering, why do I still have the check control message for brake pads? Well, because we actually have to reset it in the system, reset the reminder, otherwise it's not going to go away. To do so, we have to put the car into diagnostics mode, which is done by pressing the start button 3 times. So 1, 2, 3, do not hold your brake pedal. And that's gonna go into diagnostics mode. Now we have to wait for all of the messages to go away and for the screen to be clear. As you can see, that went away. So now I can press and hold the BC button for, well, 10 seconds or so, or until something shows up on the screen. And there's our service reset menu. You can press once to cycle through the different items, so brake fluid, vehicle check, brake pads, and then you press and hold BC button once again for about 10 seconds or so until you get a reset question mark. There it is. Now it says reset question mark, and we press and hold to confirm. So I'm going to hold it again for about 10 seconds. And there it is. We are all done. Once the engine has been started, we can go into required services, and as you can see, brake pads are no longer on the list, so that's great. And of course we can check control messages, and the only one we have here is fuel reserve, and that's it. So that's how you reset the service reminders on BMW G chassis cars, so BMW X5, X6, X7, and pretty much all the other BMWs of the same generation.